Globalists who sold out and the opposition trying to salvage a country. These are their stories.
Merci. Sénateur Oussakos.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Bienvenue, Monsieur le ministre.
Merci.
Monsieur le ministre, le commissaire aux langues officielles joue un rôle essentiel pour protéger les droits linguistiques des Canadiens. En janvier dernier, vous avez prolongé son mandat de 6 mois jusqu'en juillet. Et voilà qu'il vient d'être prolongé encore une fois pour 6 mois de plus. Cela rappellera le fiasco de votre gouvernement où vous avez maintenu une commissaire d'intérimaire pendant près de 2 ans, pendant que vous tentiez de nommer une grande amie libérale, Madeleine Meilleur. Monsieur le ministre, est-ce que ce délai existe parce que vous essayez encore une fois de nommer une libérale à un poste qui devrait être très impartial?
Merci, Monsieur le Sénateur, pour votre question. Monsieur le Président, sénateur, sénatrice, je suis très heureux d'être ici aujourd'hui. Je pense que c'est ma 4e ou 5e participation à votre période de questions en tant que ministre depuis que je suis en poste en 2019. Monsieur le sénateur, je ne partage pas du tout votre point de vue. Notre gouvernement en a fait plus que tout autre gouvernement fédéral pour les langues officielles au Canada. Nous avons modernisé la loi sur les langues officielles. Nous avons investi 4 milliards de dollars dans les langues officielles, ce qui est un record historique au pays. Nous avons, pour la première fois dans l'histoire du pays, atteint les cibles d'immigration francophone hors Québec de 4 % qui était une cible que plusieurs gouvernements ont poursuivie sans pouvoir l'atteindre. Nous avons réussi. Nous serons à 7 % d'ici la fin de l'année et notre objectif, c'est d'atteindre 12 % d'ici 2029 en termes d'immigration francophone hors Québec, ce qui est un seuil qui permettra aux communautés francophones hors Québec non seulement de se maintenir, mais même voire d'augmenter et d'avoir des communautés francophones de plus en plus résilientes et vibrantes partout au pays. Je tiens d'ailleurs à saluer tous les franco-ontariens et franco-ontariennes aujourd'hui en ce 50e anniversaire du drapeau franco-ontarien.
Monsieur le avec la commissaire aux langues officielles que ce gouvernement bricole avec des nominations intérimaires, on voit exactement la même chose avec le directeur parlementaire du budget, un autre agent du Parlement dont le mandat a été prolongé à la pièce. Pourquoi votre gouvernement a-t-il tant de difficultés à respecter le processus de nomination d'agents du Parlement dans un délai raisonnable? Et pouvez-vous nous promettre que le gouvernement aura un nouveau commissaire aux langues officielles en poste avant la fin de l'année? Ce n'est pas juste une question de déposer de l'argent, là. La poste de commissaire aux langues officielles, c'est très important.
Monsieur le sénateur, si vous pensez qu'on peut sauvegarder nos langues officielles au Canada sans investir de l'argent, moi, je ne sais pas comment on peut le faire. Honnêtement, que ce soit la minorité linguistique anglophone au Québec, les minorités francophones hors Québec, si on n'investit pas dans nos langues officielles, on n'y arrivera tout simplement pas. Et ce sont ces investissements historiques-là qui permettent à ces communautés-là d'aller mieux. Il y a des défis encore, bien sûr, mais pour ce qui est de répondre à votre question, est-ce que je m'engage à ce que D'ailleurs, moi, je n'ai prolongé qu'une seule fois le mandat du commissaire, puisque je ne suis en poste que depuis les dernières élections en tant que ministre des langues officielles. Et pour ce qui est d'un engagement, qu'un nouveau commissaire ou une nouvelle commissaire soit nommée d'ici la fin de l'année, la réponse est oui.
Merci, Monsieur le ministre. Monsieur sénateur Oussakos, deuxième question.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Minister Guilbeault, just before we rose for the summer, I tabled an order paper question about the use of patriotic symbols like Canadian flags or pins by federal public servants and Crown Corporation employees. Over the summer, I received the government's response. No federal department, agency, or Crown Corporation, including Canada Post, has policies preventing employees from displaying such symbols at work. Yet a Canada Post employee in Montreal was bullied and harassed by colleagues for months and even reprimanded by management simply for displaying a Canadian flag at his workstation. He was forced to take it down and ultimately went on health leave. Minister, how was this allowed to happen, especially when we should be celebrating our sovereignty and our national pride? And what will you do to ensure that federal employees can proudly display the Canadian flag without fear of reprisal?
Le ministre.
Comme vous le savez, je ne suis pas le ministre responsable de la Société des postes du Canada. C'est mon collègue, le ministre Lightbound. Ce que je peux vous dire, c'est qu'au ministère du patrimoine canadien, je suis également ministre responsable de Parc Canada. Les gens sont certainement encouragés à mettre de l'avant des symboles de l'unité canadienne, comme le drapeau, par exemple, ou les symboles de Parc Canada, qui est l'une des sociétés fédérales les plus reconnues et les plus admirées. Je passerai certainement votre question à mon collègue, le ministre Lightbaum, sur ce cas précis-là, dont je n'ai pas les informations.
Sénateur Oussakos.
Minister, you are the minister responsible for Canadian heritage and to defend our national identity. Minister, this employee has now returned to work but was forced to take his flag down and even change locations because of the harassment he suffered. All Canadians deserve a clear response from you here today. Will you assure us that this employee will be free from harassment or retaliation in forums going forward, and that he and others are free to display the Canadian flag in all public corporations, Crown corporations, and our public service?
Ministre.
Comme je vous l'ai dit précédemment, Monsieur le sénateur, je n'ai pas les informations sur ce cas précis-là, donc je ne commenterai pas un cas que je ne connais pas.
Sénateur Surette.
Bonjour, Monsieur le ministre. Merci d'être parmi nous cet après-midi. Selon le cadre de responsabilisation et reddition compte de la loi sur les langues officielles modernisée en 2023, c'est le président du Conseil du Trésor, votre collègue, le ministre Ali, qui dirige la mise en œuvre de la loi au sein du gouvernement fédéral, en consultation avec les autres ministres, et qui veille à sa bonne gouvernance. Votre rôle en tant que ministre de l'Identité et de la Culture canadienne, ministre responsable des langues officielles, est un peu plus spécifique, c'est-à-dire de progresser l'égalité de statut et d'usage du français et de l'anglais dans la société canadienne en général. Pouvez-vous faire des commentaires ou nous dire comment vous allez travailler avec le ministre du Conseil du Trésor pour la mise en œuvre de la loi sur les langues officielles?
Monsieur le ministre.
Merci pour la question. En fait, donc de la modernisation de la loi sur les langues officielles découlent 3 projets de règlement pour sa mise en œuvre. 2 projets de règlement qui sont sous la responsabilité de mon ministère, le ministère du Patrimoine, et un règlement qui est sous la responsabilité, comme vous l'avez spécifié, de mon collègue, le président du Conseil du Trésor. Nous travaillons en étroite collaboration ensemble. 2 de ces 3 règlements-là seront publiés dans les prochaines semaines. Il y en a un 3e sur lequel on doit faire un peu plus de travail, mais qui sera publié certainement également avant la fin de l'année.
Alors, Surette.
Merci. Puisque la responsabilité est partagée pour la mise en œuvre de la loi sur les langues officielles et que votre mandat en cours, c'est de faire avancer l'égalité entre les... Voyez-vous un conflit avec votre rôle et celui du Conseil du Trésor?
Ministre.
Merci. Pas du tout. Non, je pense que le travail que nous devons faire et nos responsabilités sont complémentaires et je vous dirais que nos équipes se parlent sur une base hebdomadaire pour s'assurer du bon arrimage des 3 différents règlements pour que la nouvelle mouture de la loi sur les langues officielles puisse vraiment prendre son envol.
Sénatrice Simons.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Minister, in between the time that you were Minister of Heritage the first time and Minister of Heritage the second time, we passed Bill C-11. And we included in Bill C-11 a privacy amendment, as suggested by the Privacy Commissioner, to protect the data of online Canadian users. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to us, that privacy provision was removed from the legislation mere months after the Senate voted it to be there. That excision was only discovered in late August by the academic Michael Geist. Can you please tell us how those important privacy provisions came to be removed from the legislation and what steps your government is taking to ensure that such a mistake never happens again?
Monsieur le ministre.
Thank you for the question. I don't have this information in front of me, despite this very thick binder that I brought with me. But I can certainly commit to you and to all senators to find the information and to provide it to the Senate. On the one hand, on the other hand, you might have heard my colleague, Minister Solomon, who's the minister responsible for artificial intelligence, recently talk about the necessity to work to protect Canadians' data, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence. So our government is working on this, and Minister Solomon will probably have more to say in the coming weeks on that.
Sénatrice Simons.
At the time that you originally proposed Bill C-10, the predecessor to Bill C-11, you told Canadians that it was likely to generate $830 million a year towards Canadian cultural programming. I believe Minister Rodriguez, your successor, bounced that number up to $1 billion. I wonder if you can tell us now how much money those changes to the online, to the Broadcasting Act have generated for Canadian production.
Monsieur le Ministre.
If memory serves, when I was Heritage Minister and C10 was tabled, I think we were talking about approximately $300 million. That's what I said at the time, and I'd be happy to provide you with public declaration that I did to this effect. As you know, as you probably know, this case is in front of the CRTC. The operationalization of what was C10 that became C11 is done by an arm's length organization, which is the CRTC. We anticipate that it will provide about $200 million per year for artists and our creators in Canada. And the CRTC is moving along with the implementation of Bill C11.
Senator Quinn.
Minister, my office has been dealing with some issues related to proposed marine protected areas in the Campobello Island, Deer Island, Bay of Fundy area of New Brunswick. When my office reached out to the offices of the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, they directed us to the Secretary of State for Nature as the lead on the file, who falls under your portfolio at Heritage. I'm wondering if you can provide this chamber some rationale for the machinery of government change that puts marine protected areas under the authority of the Department of Heritage, while officials from DFO and Halifax are the ones handling all the regional MPA files and related consultations with local stakeholders.
Minister.
Thank you for the question. I think there's probably some confusion, and maybe I can try and shed some light on this. I can confirm that as of now, the establishment of marine protected areas, also known as MPAs, remain under the purview of the Ministry or the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans Canada. That being said, you are correct that as part of my new mandate, I am the Minister responsible for Parks Canada, Minister responsible for nature. Parks Canada is now back under the responsibility of the Department of Canadian Heritage, which is where it was initially created in 1994. It was created under Heritage. And we obviously work in close collaboration with different departments, Parks Canada, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Environment and Climate Change, on conservation projects, whether they're terrestrial or marine. It's very rare that a department will work alone on a project, but for MPAs, the Department of Fisheries is the lead.
Senator Quinn.
Minister, it's an important file to me from that area, and fishers directly affected because local fishermen associations have not been getting answers from DFO about their concerns for at least a couple of years now. Just 2 days ago, the Fundy North Fishermen's Association met with DFO on the MPA file and asked them about the machinery change. DFO said they weren't aware of what the plans were and still could not provide information to address their concerns. I'm worried officials in headquarters and in the regions are not talking to each other, nor do they have the direction to enable them to do their job in speaking with their clients. Minister, I think you've clarified who has the lead, but is it DFO or is it Heritage? Who can members of the Fundy North Fishermen's Association turn to as they have concerns that must be heard and considered? And will you commit to providing clarification for these Canadians?
Minister.
So, as I said, the lead department for the creation of marine protected areas is the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. They are the lead on that. I can certainly reach out to my colleague, Minister Thompson, to make sure that she follows up and that those fishermen get answers to their questions.
Senator Klein.
Minister, thank you for your ongoing service and for taking the time to join us to field a few questions. My question for you is regarding the RCMP Heritage Centre, located adjacent to the elite RCMP Training Academy in Regina, where every Mountie has trained since 1885. The RCMP Heritage Centre is a 65,000 square foot majestic facility and houses 18,000 square feet of exhibits. In 2019, both the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party committed to establishing the RCMP Heritage Centre as a national museum. In its fall and economic statement last December, the Government of Canada proposed $12 million for the Department of Canadian Heritage to support the RCMP Heritage Centre, and they reaffirmed the government's commitment to transform it into a national museum. Minister, given the RCMP's national significance, please update the Senate on progress and next steps toward officially transforming it as a national museum.
Minister.
Thank you, Senator, for your question. In fact, I was in Regina recently where I had the chance to meet with the leadership team for the RCMP Museum. They have done impressive work. And currently, the collection and land are managed by the RCMP. And we are actively in discussion with the Heritage Center to move forward on making this happen. We're working together on a path forward for the creation of this.
Senator Klein.
Minister, thank you for that, by the way. Towards telling Canada's whole story, I commend you for introducing Government Bill C-23 in the last Parliament. Though it died on the order paper, that legislation would have ensured First Nations, Inuit, Métis representation on the Historic Sites and Monuments Board of Canada. This change could take a major step to answer Call to Action 79 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Sadly, an earlier version, Private Member Bill C-374, was filibustered in the Senate in 2019. Would you please raise the government colleagues with the government colleagues the importance of reintroducing Bill C-23?
Minister.
Yes, you're right, Senator. Unfortunately, the bill did not make it through the last Parliament. Since I'm still Minister responsible for Parks Canada, this falls under Parks. We will work with Parks and colleagues to reintroduce this bill. I would like to take the opportunity next week on the 30th is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which was the first bill that I got passed in Parliament, the first time I was Heritage Minister between 2019 and 2021.
Sénateur Carignan.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour, Monsieur le Ministre, ça va bien? Vous avez, dans le cadre du plan d'action des langues officielles en 2023-2028, vous l'avez dit, vous avez 4 milliards qui est identifié dans le budget pour les langues officielles sur 5 ans. De cette somme, 3 milliards sont attribués à votre ministère et 1,1 milliard à 10 autres ministères qui ont des portions qui touchent les langues officielles. Le gouvernement a donné instruction, avec le ministre des Finances, de couper 7,5 % des budgets en 2026-27 pour monter graduellement à 15 % en 28-29. Je suis inquiet des budgets qui sont attribués dans les autres ministères, parce que si on coupe là, on coupe dans les langues officielles. Quels sont les gestes ou actions que vous avez posés auprès de vos collègues pour vous assurer que les budgets dédiés aux langues officielles qui ne sont pas dans le core business du ministère soient coupés?
Je pense que je comprends le sens de votre question, Monsieur le Sénateur. Il faut comprendre que l'exercice de rationalisation que le ministre des Finances a demandé à tous les collègues du cabinet, ce n'est pas un exercice qui est mur à mur. Et il y a bien entendu des conversations qui ont cours entre mon équipe, l'équipe du ministre des Finances, le ministre des Finances et moi-même, le premier ministre, sur ce que nous cherchons à faire, c'est de faire en sorte que les Canadiens et les Canadiennes en aient plus pour leur argent. Alors, dans certains cas, il y a des duplications, des organisations, et je ne parle pas nécessairement des langues officielles, mais je vais vous donner un autre exemple du côté du patrimoine. On a Téléfilm Canada qui a été créé pour financer des films. Oui, mais je vous donne juste un exemple très rapide. On a le Téléfilm Canada pour financer les films. On a le Fonds des médias pour financer la télé. On a créé ces institutions-là à l'époque où les gens regardaient la télé à la télé, des films au cinéma, alors qu'aujourd'hui, tout le monde regarde ça sur leur téléphone, sur leur tablette. Est-ce qu'on a besoin de deux institutions qui font essentiellement la même chose? Est-ce qu'on ne devrait pas les regrouper pour faire des économies pour la population canadienne? Alors, c'est ce genre d'exercice-là auquel nous nous prêtons présentement. Et bien entendu, j'ai fait beaucoup de représentations auprès du ministre des Finances et du premier ministre sur l'importance de maintenir nos engagements en termes de langues officielles.
Sénateur Carignan.
Mais pour ce qui est des ministères, exemple, je prends immigration, réfugiés, 84 millions. Est-ce qu'il va y avoir une réduction de 15 % du 84 millions?
Je suis le ministre de la Diversité et de la Culture canadienne et des langues officielles. Je ne suis pas le ministre des Finances. Nous saurons le 4 novembre, lorsque le budget sera déposé, quels seront exactement les budgets de chacun des ministères et des sociétés d'État.
C'est 3 milliards. Là, j'ai 90 secondes, j'ai bien compris.
Deuxième question, en effet.
Parfait, merci. Excusez d'avoir anticipé. Donc, votre budget à vous, c'est 3 milliards. Si on coupe de 15 c'est 433 millions. Là, c'est à vous, là. Puis vous deviez envoyer vos chiffres au mois d'août au ministre des Finances. Quelles sont les recommandations de coupure que vous avez faites dans votre ministère au ministre des Finances et au premier ministre? Vous avez 15 à couper. À quel endroit vous l'avez coupé, le 400 millions?
C'est là où je ne partage pas votre point de vue et la caractérisation que vous faites de cet exercice-là. Ce n'est pas le genre d'exercice que le ministère et moi avons fait. Nous avons travaillé à chercher où est-ce qu'on pouvait faire des économies, où est-ce qu'il était possible de réduire les duplications dans différents programmes, par exemple, ou même dans différents ministères pour être le plus efficace possible. Alors, c'est le travail que nous avons fait au cours de l'été.
Vous avez 15 trouvé, vous avez 433 millions, vous avez fait des recommandations au ministre. Est-ce que vous coupez dans l'éducation à la langue de la minorité, par exemple, qui est 752 millions, ou l'appui à l'apprentissage de la langue seconde de 428 millions? Est-ce que vous réduisez ces budgets-là?
Comme je vous l'ai dit, je ne partage pas votre caractérisation de cette réduction des investissements-là dans les langues officielles. Je ne le partage simplement pas.
Sénatrice McBean. Senator McBean.
Minister Guilbeault, thank you for being here today. As the minister ultimately responsible for sport, I want to ask you about the Future of Sport in Canada Commission's recently released report. The report states clearly that sport and physical activity are vital threads in the fabric of Canadian life. Yet, it also found that the system is severely underfunded. National sport organizations are expected not only to develop athletes and grow participation across the country, but also to provide safe environments, advance diversity and inclusion, and strengthen governance, all while operating with static or shrinking resources that have not kept pace with inflation for 2 decades. The report calls for bold leadership and vision. Will the government commit to urgently increasing core funding for national sport organizations and national parasport organizations, and to developing a long-term, reliable funding strategy for sport in Canada?
Question.
Minister.
Sorry, my apologies, Mr. President. Thank you for the question. I had the opportunity of meeting the commissioner and members of her team, where she presented not all, but many of the findings. As you know, it is very recent. We created this commission because we wanted to have suggestions, proposal on how we can improve safe sport in Canada. My colleague, Secretary of State Van Couverden, who's an Olympic athlete, who knows a lot about the sector, myself and the department are working with the Department of Finance to see how we can improve our support for the sports sector in Canada, and more specifically in light of safer sports for all.
Yeah, I believe we're also looking for the long-term funding strategy, but so beyond the funding, the Commission warned that sport in Canada risks losing its credibility and relevance if systemic issues of maltreatment and weak accountability are not addressed. It found that inconsistent and opaque processes for managing complaints with inadequate supports for athletes and participants who experience abuse, including those who participate outside of the federal high-performance system. Will the government commit to establishing a truly independent, transparent, and well-resourced mechanism to ensure safe, fair, and accountable sport for everyone in Canada?
Thank you. As you know, the report came out 2 or 3 weeks ago, so we are still combing through it, and we will obviously move to implement as many of the recommendation as we can. The reason we created the commission, my predecessor created the commission, is that so that we would be able to create a safer environment for people who practice high-level sports in Canada, and we will be working on this in the coming weeks and months.
Senator Arnold.
Merci d'être ici cet après-midi. I had the privilege of serving as the mayor of Moncton, New Brunswick for 9 years, and I can tell you that our city embodies many of the qualities that define Canada itself: bilingualism, cultural diversity, resilience, and a deep sense of community. We know that local journalism is the bedrock of a healthy democracy and an essential part of our Canadian cultural identity. Yet across this country, and particularly in mid-sized cities like Moncton, we are seeing the sharp decline of local journalism and community media, which are essential for reflecting and preserving our identity. This erosion of local media means fewer trusted sources for communities to learn about themselves, their institutions, and their neighbours. And it leaves a gap in the a gap that national outlets or social media cannot fill. Given the urgency of this issue, what is your department's strategy for ensuring the long-term sustainability of local and community news?
Minister.
Thank you for the question. You may be aware that we have an initiative for local journalism that the department has put forward now approximately 5 or 6 years ago. I believe we introduced this my first time around when I was Heritage Minister. We have a number of different measures that we have put forward. The agreement with Google that will provide $100 million for media across the country is another example of our government working. There's a handful of government in the world that have put in place legislation to force web giants to invest in news while they benefit greatly from it. And perhaps the third thing I could say is during the last election campaign, we made a commitment to invest in CBC Radio-Canada at least $150 million in the first year of our mandate and bring the funding for the public broadcaster to somewhere on par with the average of G7. Right now, we ran second last, just in front of the United States in terms of dollars invested per person. And one of the requirements of those increased investment in public broadcaster is that they invest more in local news across the country.
Senator Arnold.
Thank you for that. Unfortunately, we're just not seeing it on the ground. And younger Canadians in New Brunswick, and in fact all over, increasingly get their news and culture almost exclusively online. Yet much of that content comes from global platforms. So how is your department ensuring that regional voices, including Acadian and Francophone perspectives, remain visible and accessible in the digital space rather than drowned out by outside content?
Ministre.
Senator, you will please apologize. I have the answer in French here, mais laissez-moi juste, donc certains. Alors, vous dites que vous ne les voyez pas. Il y a un crédit d'impôt pour la main-d'œuvre journalistique pour mieux servir les communautés. Le Fonds du Canada pour les périodiques. Je parlais de l'initiative pour le journalisme local. C'est certain qu'avec l'équipe du patrimoine et le premier ministre, on essaie de voir est-ce qu'il y a d'autres choses qu'on pourrait faire. La pression que nos médias, notamment nos médias locaux, subissent, ce n'est pas un phénomène qui est uniquement canadien. On le voit partout sur la planète. Le fait qu'il y a de plus en plus de gens qui vont chercher leurs nouvelles sur les plateformes, et même plus sur les plateformes, mais seulement sur les Large Language Models, les LLMs, est un défi.
Monsieur le ministre, Senator Down.
Thank you. Minister, Senator Marty Deakin has introduced legislation designed to address advertising for sport betting, an industry whose message feeds and feeds off what for many is a destructive addiction to gambling, and whose profits come from people who in some cases can ill afford it. Exploiting people and their hopes for an easy win is at the heart of gambling. After all, give us your money and in all likelihood you'll never see it again is not much of a marketing slogan. As the saying goes, you're the one gambling, the house knows it will come out ahead. The impact of sports betting can also serve as a corrupting influence among players and officials in the sports involved. You cannot legislate away human weaknesses, but you can limit the ability of others to profit from that weakness. Given the growing recognition of this problem, does the government intend to have the CRTC restrict advertising for sports betting?
Merci. Thank you for the question. This is something that the government is looking into, and what would be the best vehicle to try and, as you rightly pointed out, limit the damage that this is having on too many Canadians.
Currently, the government of Canada doesn't allow advertising for alcohol and tobacco. Surely the fact that exceptions have been made in the past suggests that more can be made in the future. The successful campaign to restrict alcohol and cigarette advertising can provide guidance for similar efforts in this area. A key argument when we voted on legislation for single sports betting was that it would regulate sports betting in Canada, strengthen consumer protection to ensure the safety of those participating, and bring revenue and tax dollars inside our borders to invest back into our communities. Where are the measures to protect Canadians?
Minister.
As I was saying, Senator, this is something that myself and many of my colleagues are looking into, and to try and find what the best vehicle to move forward would be.
Sénatrice Odette.
Monsieur le Président, Guilbeault. Comme vous le savez, il y a un retard concernant la revision et l'examen indépendant de la loi sur les langues autochtones. Et je sais que vous avez lancé un processus pour remédier à cela. Merci. Mais j'aimerais ça que vous me rassuriez qu'il y a pour cette fois-ci une approche qui va avoir une composante et une expertise dont les nations, le français est la deuxième langue, pour ne pas reprendre le même chemin dans lequel les nominations pour les comités d'experts ou aviseurs ou commissaires ne parlent qu'anglais et leur langue autochtone. Pouvez-vous me rassurer que cette fois-ci, les nations Québec vont faire partie du processus?
Monsieur le ministre.
Oui, sénatrice, merci pour votre question. Vous savez, effectivement, c'est un dossier qui est très important. Je pense que l'un des éléments dont nous sommes très fiers, c'est que cette loi-là sur les langues autochtones, c'est la première loi adoptée au Parlement qui a été co-construite avec les Premières Nations, les Inuits et les Métis. Les mesures qu'on a prises pour la mise en œuvre de cette loi-là ont permis de soutenir jusqu'à maintenant 3000 projets communautaires partout au pays visant à restaurer, protéger, promouvoir ces aspects-là des langues autochtones, mais aussi des cultures. Comme nous nous apprêtons, comme vous l'avez dit, à procéder à un examen indépendant, je peux vous assurer que nous menons ce travail en partenariat avec les peuples autochtones et que les points de vue de toutes les communautés autochtones seront pris en compte, y compris ceux des nations au Québec.
Sénatrice Odette.
Rassurant, on a tous et toutes entendu. Alors, est-ce possible de rencontrer le chef régional de l'Assemblée des Premières Nations? Il y a des tentatives entre les deux bureaux, puis je pense qu'un dialogue assez rapide serait important.
Monsieur le ministre.
Merci. J'ai eu le plaisir de le rencontrer à plusieurs reprises, pas dans mes nouvelles fonctions, mais on s'écrit, lui et moi, on se texte. Je peux vous assurer que nous allons travailler avec l'Assemblée des Premières Nations du Québec et du Labrador sur la révision de la loi. Absolument.
Senator Housakos.
Minister, we're facing economic crisis. We're facing political tariff economic crisis. And obviously, if we're going to be able to overcome all that, we're going to need unity like never before in this country. You're the Minister of Canadian Identity. It is noted at the beginning of your title, a very lengthy title. So my question to you is a very simple one. How do you define and what is Canadian identity to you?
Minister.
If I was to read all of my title right now, it'd probably use up all of my 90 seconds that I have with you, so I won't do it. And far from me to sit here and tell anyone what is or should be Canadian identity. That's not the mandate that the Prime Minister has asked me the role that the Prime Minister has asked me to play. My role is to work to ensure that the diversity of Canadian identities, whether they're Francophone, Anglophone, Indigenous, are well represented, are put forward as part of the fabric of our society. I can give you the example of the Canada Strong Pass, for example, this summer, where we saw record level attendance in Parks Canada, national museums. We invited provinces to collaborate with us on this program. 9 out of 10 provinces decided to participate in this project. I was recently at a culture ministers meeting in Regina, and everyone from coast to coast to coast said, we want to work with your government to work on more nation building measures like this one. That's the role that I have to play.
Rousakos.
Minister, your government's uncontrollable immigration policy has created enough diversity, and obviously the challenges are what they are. But my question is very concerning when I have a minister here who can't really define what his role is. And when it's all said and done, will you at least acknowledge that the two founding people, the French and the English, along with the special status and the recognition of our Indigenous people is at the core of our heritage? Will you at least acknowledge that? And can you please at least explain to me what is your program of integration that will allow us to create a Canadian identity that will allow us to go forward as a united country, coast to coast to coast?
Minister.
Peut-être que j'ai mal répondu en anglais, sénateur, je vais le faire en français, mais dans la réponse que je vous ai donnée à votre première question, j'ai parlé des langues francophones, j'ai parlé des langues anglophones, j'ai parlé de la place des peuples autochtones dans l'identité canadienne. Alors, si ma réponse en anglais n'était pas claire, j'espère qu'elle est plus claire en français.
Pierre Rousakos, deuxième question.
Monsieur le ministre, tu évites tout le temps la question. Ma question était très simple. Peux-tu nous donner ta définition? C'est quoi votre plan par rapport à l'intégration de millions d'immigrants qui a rendu au Canada? C'est quoi votre plan de créer un esprit de unification dans ce pays, aussi une identité unifiée et intégrée dans la famille avec les deux peuples fondateurs et avec nos peuples autochtones? C'est quoi votre plan? Qu'est-ce que vous êtes prêt à faire et comment tu vas faire ça pour créer cette identité nationale?
Monsieur le ministre.
Il y a énormément de choses que nous faisons. Je pourrais vous donner l'exemple des 750 millions de dollars que nous versons à chaque année au gouvernement du Québec pour les programmes de francisation. Pardon. Pour les nouveaux arrivants. Donc, c'est 3/4 de milliard de dollars à chaque année qui va au gouvernement du Québec. On parlait tout à l'heure des 4 milliards de dollars qui sont commis pour la stratégie nationale, pour la mise en œuvre de la loi sur les langues officielles. Je pourrais parler des investissements qu'on fait dans les arts et la culture à l'échelle du pays, dans nos musées nationaux. Il y a énormément de choses que nous faisons et que nous allons continuer de faire, et peut-être de nouvelles choses, de nouveaux outils qu'on va ajouter à notre boîte à outils sur cette question importante-là de l'identité canadienne.
Sénateur Rousakos.
Encore une fois, Monsieur le ministre, excuse-moi, là, vous avez tout expliqué là, sauf une stratégie par rapport à l'intégration de le nouveau arrivé au Canada dans une famille canadienne avec une identité canadienne et avec tout le respect. Si, comme un gouvernement, on n'a pas la capacité de défendre, puis avant tout, d'expliquer c'est quoi notre identité, parce que honnêtement, là, jusqu'à date, ton explication est un petit peu floue, là. Je suis très inquiet.
Monsieur le ministre.
Je ne partage pas votre point de vue, monsieur le sénateur.
Clément.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Ministre. Thank you for being here today. I recently had the opportunity to attend WAVES 2025, an incredible conference put on by the Office of the Commissioner of Indigenous Languages. At the end of the week, Jeremy Dutcher, Polaris Prize winner, performed and sang, "Our languages are going to save us, and we're going to save them." No one doubts or questions the importance of Indigenous languages. They're deeply connected to identity, culture, health, past, future. Yet, planned spending by Heritage Canada on Indigenous languages has dropped. According to one of the presenters at the conference, Daniel Brandt and Associates, we're talking $118 million in 23-24, and then $52 million, just $52 million in 24-25. Why is the Government of Canada lowering its investment in Indigenous languages at a critical time for their preservation?
Thank you for the question. I attended that event as well. As you may know, I am the minister who created the Office of the Commissioner to Indigenous Languages and nominated the Commissioner and 3 directors. I think it's important to look at where we started from. When we came into power in 2015, the previous Conservative government invested annually in Indigenous languages $5 million. Between the period of 2019-2020 to 28-29, our government will have invested $1.4 billion in Indigenous languages in this country. 5 million, 1.4 billion. That's the difference between our approach to supporting Indigenous languages to the Conservative government approach. And after 28-29, it's $162 million ongoing to support the implementation of the Indigenous Languages Act. As I was telling your colleagues, Senatrice Odette, earlier, that those programs have supported over 3,000 community-driven projects to restore, protect, and promote important parts of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit cultures and history.
Senatrice Clément.
We'll all be reviewing the budget announcement carefully to see how the federal government is honoring its commitments in the Indigenous Languages Act, notably the promise to provide adequate, sustainable, long-term funding. Indigenous communities are exploring how artificial intelligence can help them revitalize their languages while also retaining control over their intellectual property. Is the federal government funding language revitalization initiatives that use AI? How can the federal government collaborate with Indigenous communities to ensure their intellectual property is protected according to their values, traditions, and laws?
Sir.
Thank you for the question. As you may know, the implementation of the Indigenous Languages Act is done collaboratively between with Indigenous partners through a joint implementation steering committee, which includes representatives from the Assembly of First Nations, Inuit, Tapirit, Kanantami, and the Métis National Council of Canada and Canadian Heritage. So the federal government doesn't dictate or decide alone how the funding goes to these community-driven projects. I know for a fact that we have funded apps for Indigenous languages, for phones or tablets. I don't know that we have funded AI application yet. I could certainly ask the department and we could provide you with that information. But the funding is delivered through 14 different Indigenous regional...
Monsieur le Ministre, merci. Sénateur Dalphon.
Président, bienvenue encore une fois au Sénat, Monsieur le Ministre. Quand vous êtes un membre du cabinet, ma question n'est pas directement à vos responsabilités, mais à l'ensemble de votre participation au cabinet. Les sondages démontrent qu'encore récemment, une grande majorité des Canadiens souhaitent que le gouvernement ait des politiques en matière de changement climatique. Est-ce que vous êtes confiant que le gouvernement considère que c'est toujours une priorité pour le gouvernement et pour les Canadiens de s'occuper des changements climatiques?
Monsieur le Ministre.
Oui. Je peux en rajouter si vous voulez, là, mais...
All right, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to make a video about Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act. Please bear with me. I don't make videos very often. I don't have a setup for it, so I'm going to have to be reading off of a tablet and making it with my phone, and I'll do my best. But the production quality is not going to be what you're used to on Twitter, so please just bear with me. The reason I'm making this video is because this is the most draconian anti-free speech bill probably that I have ever read, and Canadians seem to be sleeping at the switch about it. Now, it hasn't been passed into law. It's currently in its second reading in Parliament. What that means is that our members of Parliament, the ones who have chosen to show up because on and off they were lacking a quorum because so few people showed up, and that includes the Conservatives, who are the official opposition, who apparently didn't think that this was that important a debate. So they were frequently lacking a quorum, as Cheryl Gallant, who is a Conservative member who did show up, kept pointing out. So many Canadians, not just our members of Parliament who we pay to represent us, don't seem to understand that this is a really, really important bill. So I'm going to get into a little bit of the debate that was happening in the House of Commons so that you don't have to, because most of it is exceptionally boring and absurd, but I think it's important for Canadians to understand how much contempt some of the MPs have for us and have for our basic fundamental rights and freedoms. So it opened with a discussion with Kevin Lamoureux, a Liberal. He opened up, they say niceties each time. It's quite tedious, but in any event, that's just part of the protocol. That's fine. So he said that a vast majority of Canadians would think that, protecting children is important, the normal platitudes, I think we can all agree that protecting children is important. That's not the problem with this bill. The problem with the bill is that it purports to be a bill about online harms that is supposed to protect children from perverts, weirdos, psychopaths, and sociopaths, amongst them bullies at school who torture them on social media apps. What the state doesn't want you to understand about the bill is that it's really a Trojan horse bill to bring in draconian speech limitations, whereby the state would assign a tribunal to administer complaints about hate from anonymous individuals who could register them with this tribunal. They wouldn't have to pay any legal fees. And if they perceived that they were a victim of hate, then you would be dragged into the courts. You wouldn't know who your accuser was. It could be like a bitter ex. It could be an old friend. It could be someone who hates you online. It could be, another parent at school who you rubbed the wrong way. It could be just about anybody. And they could bring forth this accusation that they are, a victim of your mean words. And the punishments for this thought crime include life imprisonment. I wish I were joking, but I'm not. It sounds like a joke. It's a bad joke, but unfortunately, it's the reality of what's going on in China right now under the Castro Trudeauians. So in any event, so Kevin Lamoureux opens up discussing how it's a fantastic bill. Most Canadians would like it. And then he doesn't understand why the Conservative Party has a problem with it. Cheryl Gallant counters that they don't have confidence, the Conservatives don't have confidence in the bill. The government would be choosing the censors, which is very legitimate complaint about it and criticism. And she says the government has failed at everything it has attempted to do. That is factual. The people have lost confidence in any boards that the government has appointed, the latest being what we are hearing on SDTC. Then she counter-proposes a child protection bill that the Conservatives wish to table that zeroes in specifically on child protection, no Trojan horse aspect. Then Kevin Lamoureux replies that this is a direct quote. Mr. Speaker, I guess there are now two reasons the Conservatives are opposing the legislation. They have that far-right element, and I'm going to be a bit kind here, which has a tinfoil impact, where they believe in here and there and in the stars, and that Canadian rights are being overridden. There is nothing to it. I can assure the member opposite that she does not need to be fearful. This is not an attack on the far right. This is legislation that a vast majority of Canadians would support. End of quote. So these are the absolute kooks that we are paying to give bizarre speeches. Like, I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. They believe in here and there and in the stars. And then he slips in, and that Canadian rights are being overridden. We just spent literally years living through medical tyranny, under which, during that time period of medical tyranny, we did not have freedom of association. We didn't have freedom of expression. We didn't have any bodily autonomy. I think we can all agree on that one. What else? We didn't have freedom to travel. At some points, we weren't allowed to come and go on rail, on any kind of public transit. They tried to shut the borders down between the different provinces and succeeded in some cases. That went on for a while. At one point, they didn't want us to leave our homes. There was a curfew in Quebec. So you could actually be ticketed for leaving your home. It wasn't just a wish that people didn't leave their home. I'm trying to think of all of the rights and liberties that were suspended during that time period. It's very difficult to rattle them off the top of my head because the list was so extensive. You could.
There will be no mandatory digital ID in this country, and I will ban all of my ministers and top government officials from any involvement in the World Economic Forum.
Why do you keep spreading misinformation about puberty blockers? You're not telling the truth. You're saying that they sterilize children. That's not what puberty blockers do.
Well, I encourage you to look up what puberty is. Puberty is the process a child goes through to become sexually mature so they can have babies. Puberty blockers, by very definition, stops that process. Someone cannot have children if they don't become sexually mature. And so we are allowing for a process where kids, when they're old enough to understand the implications of the decisions that they're making, they'll be able to make that choice. And that is about age 16, so that it doesn't interfere with their ability to have kids. So that's the approach that we're taking.
But it's reversible. It doesn't permanently stop them from having children. You're conflating puberty blockers with hormone therapy.
If a puberty blocker, if you stay on it, it by definition blocks puberty. And if you're blocking puberty, you're not able to have children. So we're going to protect a kid's right to be able to make adult choices when they're adults. And we're prepared to defend that in court.
And you're prepared to force children to go through
that's going to be all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, guys.
We're on the path to being in trouble. So that's what our 5-year forecast, the numbers that we released earlier this week, indicate. That if left unchanged, the fiscal path that the government's currently on will definitely result in us being in quite a bit of trouble and having to make some hard decisions.
Now, in getting here, what do you attribute this to? Is this like Donald Trump's trade policies, you know, the roosters coming home to nest, or is this about government spending priorities and not controlling it?
I think it's kind of a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B. So there definitely is an impact in comparison to our previous forecast. You can definitely see the impact on the overall growth for the Canadian economy. A larger part of it is the government policy decisions. So there ends up being about $115 billion in net new costs since the last time we prepared a forecast back immediately prior to the election in March 2025. And a good part of that is attributable to defense. So changing geopolitical environment, priorities for the government to increase spending on defense, which we saw that was announced in June, earlier this year in June, and of course on the tax side, on the revenue side. So $6 billion a year, so about $30 billion over the next year, plus revenue that we're no longer going to have because the lowest personal rate went from 15 down to 14. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
Second week back to Parliament. The Finance Committee voted this week to drag the Finance Minister to answer the Liberals' failed finances and upcoming double deficit budget. Liberal MPs filibustered for hours to block his appearance, but opposition MPs ended the obstruction. Canadians deserve answers. How bad is the deficit? How much taxpayer money goes to bankers and bondholders to pay just the interest on the debt? How much new debt will burden Canadians and future generations? The Parliamentary Budget Officer warns the deficit could reach $100 billion. Instead of transparency, Mark Carney is planning accounting tricks, splitting the budget into operational and capital to hide reckless spending. But spending is spending, and under these Liberals, it means more debt and higher deficits. Carney has a record of shady financial practices. As chair of Brookfield, he oversaw offshore investment funds registered in Bermuda and the Cayman Islands, one even at the address of a bike shop. While his company sheltered profits from the CRA, ordinary Canadians face audits for minor errors. This double standard creates a two-tier tax system, one for the rich and powerful like Mark Carney and his crony friends, and the other is for everyone else.
I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Many of you maybe have been to the grocery store, because I think most of you have to eat, and you've probably noticed that food is astronomically high. Basics, you know, like one dad wrote to me, goes, my kid loves strawberries, can't afford strawberries anymore. Beef, all the basics are just so expensive. The Conservatives, which is the official opposition, whose job it is to hold the government to account, the government being the Liberals, was questioning them on grocery prices. Forward a motion to get rid of all the taxes that are driving up the cost of groceries. Watch this exchange.
When will this Liberal government stop emptying the wallets of Canadians to cover for their failures?
The Honourable Secretary of State for Sport.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Studies show that school food programs improve student health and mental health. They also improve learning outcomes, better grades in science, math, and reading. Mr. Speaker, those healthy meals in schools can also save a family up to $200 a month.
Adam, you're so cute. So here's the real question. Why in the world would Canadians even need a national school food program? Once you recognize why, because remember, the
Well, after saying last month it would remove all counter tariffs on U.S. goods covered under CUSMA, new reporting from the CBC has found out that the Liberal government quietly dropped more of those tariffs than advertised. The CBC's Kate McKenna broke the story, and she joins me now. So, Kate, walk us through what you found out here.
Well, David, we all remember last month when Mark Carney announced that the government was going to be dropping some retaliatory tariffs in order to kind of push ahead with trade negotiations with the United States. So at the time, the Prime Minister said that he was essentially going to be matching what the United States was doing to us, which is to say counter tariffs were going to be dropped on CUSMA-compliant goods.
Right.
So goods that were compliant with the existing free trade agreement. Implying that if a good wasn't compliant with CUSMA, then it would be tariffed. Take a listen to what he said at the time.
The Canadian government will now match the United States by removing all of Canada's tariffs on U.S. goods specifically covered under CUSMA.
Now, almost a month later, we've learned that's actually not what happened. Canada has removed all counter tariffs, regardless of whether a good was CUSMA compliant, except for, of course, the sectoral tariffs on steel, aluminum, and auto. And they never actually communicated that to the
All right, welcome back to CTV News Channel. Prime Minister Mark Carney getting ready to head to Europe today. His plane is just taking off from the airport in Ottawa, as I can see on our cameras here. The Prime Minister will be in the United Kingdom for more trade talks with the British. But Mark Carney will also be meeting with leaders of Australia, Spain, Denmark, Iceland. There he is with Keir Starmer on an earlier visit at 10 Downing Street. The idea here is to find new friends and also to deepen trade ties with the friends we have. Donald Trump's trade war on our country has really scrambled the economic math, and Canada needs new friends, allies, trading partners. And it's going to be a long road, by the way, so brace yourself.
About something that we should all know in this House, and that is that climate change is real. Last week in this House, actually, somebody from the Maritimes, from South Shore of St. Margaret, actually said that wildfires across this country were man-made, and that the hurricanes that were affecting his own region is something that has happened for hundreds of years. So, you know, I'm not from Newfoundland. I'm from the prairies. There are some very similar issues that we have with regards to transitioning workers, with regards to climate change. But what do we tell young people in our ridings? How do we respond to the fact that one of the major parties in this country refuses to admit that climate change is real in the House of Commons? You know,
we're not only in a trade war, we might be in real war. And the last thing we need is for anybody to take our patriotic battle cry of elbows up to Canadians and mock it and put it down. When Pierre Poilievre says elbows down, he is echoing MAGA talking points and attacks on our country. You can criticize Mark Carney all you want. It's your job, but you don't have to do it by denigrating Canada's sense of power and purpose and patriotism in this critical moment for our sovereignty and our economy.